Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive in. This time around, we've got quite the stack of material to unpack.
Yeah, looking forward to it. A lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's like someone really just kind of dumped out a whole toy chest of ideas around belief systems. Like how we form beliefs, the whole thing about power structures, how those work.
Right.
And all these ways that societies kind of get steered in certain directions. It gets pretty deep.
Yeah, definitely. Your sources, I mean, they're all over the map. You've got, war being looked at as like a belief system in itself.
Oh, wow.
And then there's, analyses of these historical secret societies.
Like the Illuminati and all that.
Exactly. And even some pretty out there ideas about social engineering, how whole societies might be influenced without even realizing it.
Okay, so like always,
Yeah.
I guess our job is to sort through all of this and try to find the good stuff.
Yeah, the key insights.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those nuggets that'll give you a new way of looking at things without totally overloading your brain.
Right, cut through the noise.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess a good place to start might be this whole idea of war. It's presented as like a fundamental belief system with, quote, sinister origins. That really jumped out at me.
I can see why. It's that idea that the reasons we're given for conflict, on the surface, they might actually be a way to keep us focused on one level while obscuring deeper, maybe less obvious kind of forces at work and patterns.
Okay, so like we're being distracted from the real reasons.
Potentially. It's like, think of a magician, right? They're doing all these flashy things with their hands, but the real trick is happening somewhere else entirely.
Ah, I see. So while we're looking at the troops and the tanks and all of that, there's something else going on behind the scenes.
Could be. And the source you gave, it mentions this battle beyond since 1980. The idea that there are escalations happening that go beyond the usual nation-state conflicts, the stuff we usually see on the news.
Okay, so like bigger forces at play.
Right. And there's this interesting mention of global participation and the fragility of what are called little boxes.
Little boxes.
Yeah. You could easily read that as a commentary on like the diminishing power of individual nations in some kind of larger game. It's like the traditional boundaries are breaking down.
Okay, so it's not just country versus country anymore.
Maybe not. It's suggesting that maybe the reasons for war are becoming less important than the fact that we just accept war as a normal part of society.
So we just kind of accept it without really questioning why it's happening.
It could be. It's like it becomes so familiar that we don't even see it anymore.
And then there's this little trail of breadcrumbs.
Maybe, but more subtle, more like setting the stage for something, a specific event or a particular time period.
Okay, and then this feeds right into this whole concept of a movement, of us who are not globalists, a different class of human, even mentions the effect of discipline.
It does sound like that. What's really striking is this implication of intentionality. The idea that, human development, how our societies evolve, it might not be entirely organic, like maybe it's being influenced, even directed. Well, I think what's fascinating about it is that it captures so efficiently just how limited our perception can be, right? We tend to take, whatever is right in front of us, whatever we experience with our senses, as the complete picture, without questioning what might be creating that picture, or even if there's something beyond it.
Right. Okay, so let's dig into that a little bit more. Your sources bring up this thing called the transference agenda. It's the idea that people can get so attached to their beliefs, so invested in them, that they'll actually push away anything that contradicts those beliefs, even if it's something positive. They give the example of someone clinging to an end-of-world apocalypse scenario and rejecting any sign of hope. It's that human need to be right.
Yeah, that's a deep-seated psychological thing. It's called cognitive consistency. We want our beliefs to line up, to make sense. And sometimes that means rejecting new information, especially if it challenges our core beliefs.
So we'd rather be right, even if it means clinging to a negative view.
Sometimes. And the really interesting thing here is how this tendency can be, leveraged or amplified. And not just by, bad actors, but by what the sources call familiars that push too hard.
Familiars? Like spirits or something?
No, not in this context. Here it's more like, think of social media echo chambers or, those groups where everyone shares the same belief.
Okay, so those become the familiars.
Exactly. They reinforce existing viewpoints, making it even harder to consider other perspectives.
Gotcha. So it's not just the initial source of the belief, but the environment that keeps it in place.
Right. It's like the belief gets trapped in this self-reinforcing loop.
So it's about like drawing a line between what's a genuine threat and what we might be creating in our own mind.
Exactly. It makes you question, are we fighting real monsters or shadows of our own making?
Okay, let's shift gears a bit now. Let's talk about the Illuminatis. Your sources get into some pretty deep historical stuff here. Lots of names, lots of terms. Jesuits, Masonry, pyramid tombs, the anti-Masonic party, the Jacobites. Even mentions a supposed Illuminate-confirmed book. This is definitely getting into conspiracy theory territory. But what are the key takeaways here?
Well, one of the interesting things is this attempt to trace the historical roots of certain power structures, like the connection they draw between the Bavarian Illuminati and the Jesuit order. Adam Weishaupt, the guy who founded the Illuminati, he was actually teacher of canon law, which is Catholic legal system. And the source even brings up the idea that Ignatius Loyola,
the founder of the Jesuits,
that he might have been influenced by Gnosticism.
And just for a listener who might not be familiar, what's Gnosticism?
It was this ancient philosophical and religious movement. They emphasized personal spiritual knowledge over orthodox teachings. So the source is kind of suggesting a hidden influence on these early power structures.
Okay, so like a secret lineage of ideas.
Potentially.
And the source also points out these structural similarities between the Illuminati and the Jesuits, even mentions what it calls bizarre spiritual practices within Roman Catholicism.
Right.
It even brings up Ignatius Loyola's Albumbrazos org in Spain before the whole Bavarian movement even started. It's like they're suggesting a shared history or maybe some shared underlying principles.
Yeah, it definitely hints at that. And they talk about the Gnostic idea of achieving perfection.
Okay.
And the Cathars, this group that historically clashed with the papacy. They had similar claims. And the argument seems to be that certain elite groups, they kind of adopted this concept as their own version of an Enlightenment movement. Yeah. And they incorporated rationalistic and Masonic symbolism into it.
It's like a blend of reason and mysticism.
Right. And this historical thread then brings in Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Diderot, even articles about enlightened rationalism. And then it connects all of this to Cecil Rhodes's secret society.
Right, the Rhodes Scholarship guy.
Yeah, exactly. His society apparently had a structure inspired by the Jesuits. And then there's the mention of the Grand Lodge of England and the Builders Masonic Lodge being seen as a possible spy network. I mean, it's a lot to unpack.
It is, but what's the main point they're trying to make with all of this?
I think it boils down to this idea that an Illuminati network has been established for centuries, and they're raising questions about a direct link to Adam Weishaupt and accusations of infiltration. They even mention John J. Robinson's book, Born in Blood. It looks at the connection between Freemasonry and the American Revolution.
So this is like secret societies influencing major historical events.
Yeah. The suggestion is that these long-standing hidden networks of influence might be operating beneath the surface of, mainstream society and institutions.
That's a pretty wild thought. It definitely makes you look at history differently.
Yeah, it does. It makes you wonder, who's really pulling the strings?
Okay, so moving on. Your sources delve into this concept of dealing with what is the devilish energy. Now, before anyone freaks out, they're not talking about literal devils here. It's more about negative energy, like hysteria, that comes from subjection of belief.
Yeah, the idea is that this devilish energy really stems from a fear of the unknown. And, people often get stuck in their own perspectives, their fixed ways of thinking, and that creates a kind of stagnation.
Okay, so it's not external, it's internal.
Right. The source is arguing that what we perceive as, external threats or negative forces, right, they're often just reflections of our own internal fears and beliefs.
That's deep. So if we change our beliefs, we change our reality.
It's suggesting that. And they even go so far as to say that some of our desires might not even be our own. Like, they might be implanted to reinforce certain beliefs within a larger illusion.
Oh, wow. Like we're being programmed.
It's a possibility they're raising. And then there's this mention of High Brazil.
High Brazil.
Yeah. They don't really explain it. It's like a mythical island. Shows up on old maps, but no one's ever actually found it.
So a phantom island.
Right. And in this context, it could be a metaphor for a belief that persists, even though there's no real proof.
Like a collective delusion.
Exactly. It lives in the imagination.
And these kinds of beliefs, these phantom islands in our minds, they contribute to this devilish energy.
Yeah, they can fuel that fear and uncertainty.
Okay. That's a pretty strong claim. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, the argument is that there are forces at play that are constantly observing us, collecting our data. And they use this to subtly manipulate our choices. They make it seem like we have limited options when really they're steering us down predetermined paths.
Like puppeteers.
Kind of. And the source is saying that this kind of control, it's inherently psychopathic because it disregards our individual autonomy, our well-being. It's all about manipulation.
But then they talk about walking away from all of this.
Right.
And it's presented as not as giving up, but as a way to take control. Yeah.
It often requires that you leave your comfort zone, that you're willing to challenge the perspectives that you already have. The idea is that by becoming truly aware of these forces, these manipulative forces, and by consciously detaching from them, we can transcend their control. They talk about finding flow, that state of being completely immersed in something you enjoy. And they mention building a bridge in another realm.
Okay, so like shifting our focus to something more positive, creating something new.
Yeah. It's about connecting with a different level of reality, one that's more aligned with our true desires.
So it's about turning inward, exploring our own consciousness.
It seems that way. And they mention familiar, moving from familiar to unfamiliar. That could represent, breaking free from established beliefs, those limiting beliefs.
Right.
Expanding our consciousness.
Wow, okay. So let's move on to what's described as the final revolution of the elite. This section brings in some specific names. Michael Aquino, the Temple of Set, Maurice Strong and his ties to occultism and New Age beliefs, and his connection to the Rockefellers. It also touches on the idea of different layers of society and the Rockefellers' supposed belief that competitive markets are sinful. It paints a picture of a pretty specific, maybe even hidden agenda.
Yeah. The main point here is that they're suggesting that a certain elite group, a super elite, they're not actually working towards a better world for everyone. Instead, they want a hyper-controlled world. Figures like Maurice Strong and his connections to illustrate how they're trying to integrate, philosophical and even spiritual ideas with political and economic power.
Oh, wow. To push their agenda.
Exactly.
And then the source circles back to the Club of Rome, their whole limits to growth idea, their past interest in population control. Right. But it notes that technology is changing things, maybe reducing their need for what it calls human batteries. Mm-hmm. It then brings in the Milner Group and the Earth Charter. It's like the players might change, but the goal stays the same.
Yeah. The tactics might evolve as technology advances.
Right.
But the underlying desire for control, for establishing a hierarchy, it remains. They even suggest that capitalism might be used to run a socialist movement.
Whoa, hold on. That doesn't even make sense.
I know, right? It's a provocative idea. The idea is that they're manipulating ideologies to serve their ultimate aim. They talk about blaming industrialists and promoting a form of earth worship.
Okay, so they're using both sides to achieve their goal.
That's what the source is suggesting.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But then comes this very clear statement. Advertising and public relations are the magic of today.
That's a good one.
Right. It's so true. And the source connects this to a concept from a book called Eros and Magic in the Renaissance. It describes modern societies as magician states, places where mass media creates this artificial consensus. It supports existing power structures by basically shutting out alternative viewpoints. It's like we're being constantly bombarded with messages that shape how we see the world.
It's that idea that that reality is being manufactured for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's pretty scary when you think about it. It leads into a discussion of dehumanization and where that comes from. Things like adapting to fear, dealing with hidden energies, and those strong emotional reactions we have to familiar things.
Right. The argument is that this constant flow of information, this manipulation of our emotions through the media, it can dehumanize us.
Really? How so?
Well, it makes us more reactive, less critical. We stop thinking for ourselves and just react to the latest headline or the latest outrage.
Oh, I see. So we're not really engaging with the world. We're just reacting to it.
Exactly. And ironically, the reaction against the mainstream, against what the source calls Babylon, it can actually lead people to embrace other belief systems that might be just as harmful.
So like jumping from one extreme to the other.
Right. And then there's this really fascinating idea about past lives buried in the gene code of the spirit. These memories or experiences that occasionally surface as, as feelings of something being both unfamiliar and strangely familiar.
Oh, wow. like ancestral memory.
It's introducing that possibility. It suggests that that our understanding of the world might be influenced by, by deeper, maybe unconscious levels of our being.
That's a pretty trippy thought.
It is. It's a different way of thinking about how we perceive reality.
Okay, finally, let's get into psychology, philosophy, and social engineering. This section throws out a bunch of terms: utilitarian happiness, empirisms, philosophers, naive empirism, which they define as scientific knowledge that comes only from sensory experience. And they talk about this idea of greatest good for the greatest amount of people being linked to libertarian economics. It's like they're trying to trace the intellectual roots of how societies get shaped.
They are, and they argue that after the late Middle Ages, there was this big shift away from abstract thought, away from metaphysics, towards a more scientific approach.
Oh, okay.
It's what they call a recasting of mankind. And this paved the way for all these revolutions: economic, industrial, philosophical, and political. And all of this leads to what they call a final revolution.
A final revolution, huh? Sounds ominous.
It does. And they connect this revolution to Fabianism, the ideas of Huxley.
Yeah, right. Brave New World guy.
Yeah, exactly. And Bertrand Russell's scientistic revolution. But they argue that this revolution isn't really about freedom, like it claims to be. Instead, it's about introducing a false narrative of greater good.
Okay, so it's a trick.
It could be. They even see widespread destruction as like a necessary step.
Right, like they need to tear down the old world first.
That's what they're suggesting. It's what they call the penultimate revolution that clears the way for the age of science.
Wow. That's dark. And then they bring in Aldous Huxley again, the idea of the old world collapsing so everything can be reorganized.
Yeah, and they describe this utilitarian happiness mechanism as reducing humans to purely material beings. No higher purpose, just practical outcomes.
So like robots.
Kind of. They even say that the destiny of USA is scientistic, which they define as the abuse of the discovery of the natural world. And they use Brave New World as like a blueprint for this kind of engineered society, with the alphas, the betas, all the way down to the epsilons, all color-coded and controlled with drugs and conditioning.
It's like the ultimate caste system.
Exactly. And the source points out this almost magical aspect within this seemingly rational society. They say that only someone completely outside of it, a purely mad, normal person, would see how insane it really is.
Wow. That's a pretty bleak picture.
It is. It's a warning about, what can happen when technology and the manipulation of human psychology are used to pursue absolute control.
So, like, we become slaves to the system we create.
It's a possibility they're highlighting.
They also describe the alphas as having a mental mind, while the epsilon workers, they're conditioned to get rid of their natural drives.
Right. They're stripped down to their basic instincts, and then new instincts are imprinted on them.
Like programming them to follow orders.
Exactly, to enforce the rules of this new society. And what's really disturbing is that that nature itself is seen as the enemy in this system.
So it's like humans versus the natural world.
It seems that way.
Well, that was quite a journey. We went from war as a belief system to secret societies to mind control to engineered societies.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
We did. And I think there are some really important themes that run through all of this. This idea of hidden forces shaping our reality, the power of belief systems, efforts to control society both historically and in the present day, and this question of individual awareness and whether we have any real agency.
Absolutely. Your sources have given us a lot to think about. Some of it's pretty unsettling, but it's important to confront these ideas.
It is. So to you, our listener, as you think about all of this, as you think about these magician states and these manufactured realities, what beliefs are you questioning right now? And what steps can you take to really understand the world around you, to see through the illusions, to become more self-directed? It's a big question, but it's one worth asking. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It was intense, but hopefully enlightening.
Definitely. Food for thought.
Absolutely. Until next time, stay curious.